Priyanka, you may start sharing the screen.
Yes, sir. Hello.
Hi, Rajdeep, I have something to discuss with you and Shoham, so please remain behind.
Okay.
Yes, you can start presenting when you are ready.
Okay, sir. Okay. Um, Priyanka, you may stop. I can try sharing the screen.
Cancel করে দাও এটা.
Sir, is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. We are Group 3, the Tarantulas, and today we are going to be presenting, we are going to be analyzing trends in MLPR and FLPR for UK and Germany. So first, we have an overview with respect to economic parameters affecting the labor force participation rate, that is male and female. We see a general trend in this analysis that in most countries, men tend to participate in labor markets more frequently than women. Now, a lot of factors uh, affect this thing. Now, all over the world, labor force participation among women of working class has increased substantially in the last century. The difference was vast, as we will see on the coming slides. The gap has decreased with coming ages, and women all over the world allocate a substantial amount of time to activities that are not typically recorded as economic activities, such as uh, uh, everyday work, household work, uh, babysitting, and stuff like that. So this has decreased constantly with age as the world is developing. And now we can see that female participation in labor markets tend to increase when the time cost of unpaid work, care work is reduced, shared equally with men, and or made more compatible with market work. Now, here on the right hand side, we are going to be comparing the male labor force participation rate versus female labor force participation rate of United Kingdom. Now, as we can see in the graph, there is a sharp decline from a hefty 48% to a mere 10%. We can notice that the labor force participation rate of males reduces from 86% of the 1960s to 68% of 2019. This is a significant decrease in the labor force participation of males. As on the positive side, we can see that there has also been an increase in the labor force participation rate of females from 37% to 58% in 2019. When we go to the next graph, here we are comparing MLPR and FLPR of Germany. There's a noteworthy decay of between MLPR and FLPR from a colossal 30% to a trivial 11%. uh, Again, we can see that the labor force participation of males reduces from 71% to 66% in 2020. And again, on the positive side, we see that the rate of females has gone up from 40% to 56% in 2020. Now, if we are to compare MLPR of UK versus Germany, as you can see, because of inadequate data, not much can be said about the participation rates of males in Germany before 1983. Although seeing the trend, we can make a prediction about the aforementioned rates that United Kingdom's MLPR has sorry, MLPR of Germany has always been lower than that of United Kingdoms, with a shock or a sudden purge in 1978 to 1980s that we can see. These are we are considering this as an exception. There is a visible ebbing or a decay in the MLPR of UK from a towering 87% to 67% in 2019, and the MLPR of Germany has more or less been constant from 1983 to 2020, with a shallow decline of 2 or 3%. That is, this difference has been constant throughout, starting from 1983 and ending at 2019. Now, if we are to look at FLPR of UK versus Germany, again, yet again, little can be said about the labor force participation rate of females in Germany before 1983. The FLPR of UK has increased constantly from 37% to 58% in 2019. Uh, the FLPR of Germany has also seen a constant but steady growth from 40% to 56% in early 2020. And again, we can see that United Kingdom has always maintained a constant difference of 5% in the FLPR and preceded Germany in the same. It has always maintained that that extra 2 or 3%, as we can see in the analysis. Now, moving on to the regression, Shreyoshi will be taking over. Shreyoshi.
Yes, so now here we can see the regression analysis between male labor force participation rate and female labor force participation rate with respect to explanatory variables such as GDP per capita and GDP per capita square in Germany, which is shown on the left side, and UK, which is shown on the right side.
Okay,
So,
Sriyoshi, I'll just want to interrupt for 1 minute, please.
yes, sir.
যেটা হচ্ছে, if you want to test for non-linearity, see, why we are taking the GDP per capita square is, we believe that the relation is between GDP and labor force participation is non-linear.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Yes,
না না
sir.
ঠিক আছে, অত ঘাবড়ে যেও না, this is basically to learn, show you how to analyze, and I expect you to make errors.
Okay, sir.
যেটা হবে যে জিডিপি পার ক্যাপিটার সঙ্গে রিগ্রেস করে তোমরা দেখো যে রিলেশনটা কিরকম হচ্ছে। ইউ ডোন্ট নিড দ্য ইউ ডোন্ট নিড টু প্লট ইট অ্যাগেন্স্ট জিডিপি পার ক্যাপিটা স্কোয়ার। নিচের যে দুটো গ্রাফ, এই দুটো গ্রাফ আমরা কখনোই রান করব না। উই জাস্ট হ্যাভ টু রান দ্য ফার্স্ট টু গ্রাফস, লেবার ফোর্স পার্টিসিপেশন অ্যাগেন্স্ট জিডিপি, করে আমরা প্লটের নিচেরটা দেখব যে ইজ ইট লিনিয়ার অর ইজ ইট নন লিনিয়ার। জার্মানি ক্ষেত্রে যেমন লিনিয়ার, কিন্তু এখানে আমরা ইউকের ক্ষেত্রে একটু দেখছি যে ওপর দিক থেকে নেমে একটা লিনিয়ার মতো ট্রেন্ড হচ্ছে। সো ইট ইজ সামথিং লাইক হাফ অফ ইউ শেপ, ইউ এর বাঁ দিকটা যেরকম হয় সেরকম।
Okay, sir.
ঠিক আছে?
Yes, sir.
সুতরাং
Noted.
জাস্ট জিডিপিটা তোমরা, এটা আমি সবাইকেই বলছি, অলমোস্ট অল অফ ইউ হ্যাভ মেড দিস সেম মিস্টেক। Just if you want to check linearity, plot against GDP per capita or plot against x, not x square, and see whether you're getting a linear relation or whether it is a curve. Linear hole tomra shudu y equal to alpha plus beta x run korbe. If you're seeing that it is non-linear, convex হচ্ছে, concave হচ্ছে, u shape হচ্ছে, তখন তোমরা y equal to alpha plus beta x, beta 1x plus beta 2x square, এই ফর্মে ইকুয়েশনটা রান করবে। ঠিক আছে? ওকে,
Okay,
প্লিজ
sir.
কন্টিনিউ।
Yes, sir. So here in case of female labor force participation rate for both the countries, we can see that with the increasing of higher values of GDP that is gained over time, female labor force has seen a steady growth in both nations. Whereas in case of the male labor force participation rate for both the countries, we can see that with increasing of the GDP, male labor force participation rate falls, but not that much, which indicates that people are leaving the workforce for probably higher paying jobs, which requires less labor or are being replaced by women. So here, from here, we can conclude that economic growth increases total labor force participation as well as
আচ্ছা, এখানে এখানে আমি একটা কথা বলছি, তুমি বলছো যে পিপল আর লিভিং দ্য লেবার ফোর্স টু জয়েন হায়ার পেড ওয়ার্কস,
yes,
এখানে
sir.
কি তোমার ওয়ার্ক প্যাটার্নটা রয়েছে?
No,
এখানে
sir.
তুমি তো জাস্ট নিচ্ছ ওরা কাজ করছে কিনা। সো ইফ দে লিভ দ্য প্রেজেন্ট জব অ্যান্ড জয়েন আ হায়ার পেড জব, তাহলে তো সে ওয়ার্কার হিসেবেই ক্লাসিফাইড হচ্ছে। উইল দ্য
Yes.
লেবার ফোর্স পার্টিসিপেশন চেঞ্জ?
No, sir.
Exactly. So the interpretation that you're giving, be a little bit careful.
Okay, sir. So can we move? Okay,
Yes, yes.
so here, no, go to the previous slide.
জিডিপি
So,
পার ক্যাপিটাটা এক্সপ্লেন করার দরকার নেই।
okay, sir. So if we see the value of R square, so the higher the value of R square indicates the higher the significance. So in case of Germany, the value of R square is greater than that of UK when we consider GDP per capita. But for GDP per capita square, the value of R square is greater in UK than in Germany. Can we move to the next slide?
ওকে, হ্যাঁ।
So here we can see the relationship between male labor force participation rate and female labor force participation rate with respect to log GDP per capita and log GDP per capita square. Log GDP per capita indicates the rate of change. So here also we can see the same trends in male labor force participation rate, where log GDP has a negative impact on male labor force participation rate, and in case of female labor force participation rate, the log GDP has a positive impact in both the countries. The R square values in case of Germany is greater than that of UK when we consider log GDP per capita, and also in case of log GDP per capita square. Next slide.
দেখো এখানে তোমরা 4টে স্লাইড নিয়ে এসেছো, and you have got 8 diagrams.
Yes, sir.
You're over presenting your case. তুমি যখন জাস্ট জিডিপি পার ক্যাপিটা নিয়েছো, and then in the next slide you're showing log GDP per capita. Are you adding anything? Log is just a positive monotonic transformation. দেখো তুমি নিজে যে কাজটা করছো, ব্যাক এন্ডে যে কাজটা করছো, that's fine. You can run the 2 graphs. But after you have run it, decide which graph to present and show only that.
Okay, sir.
যখন জিডিপি আমরা নিচ্ছি, জিডিপিতে এখানে আমি তোমাদের বলেছিলাম জিডিপি পার ক্যাপিটাটা নিতে। তার কারণ হচ্ছে ভ্যালুগুলো ছোট হয়ে যাবে, উইদাউট ডিস্টর্টিং দ্য র্যাঙ্কিং ইউ উইল গেট আ বেটার রেজাল্টস ওভার হিয়ার। সুতরাং জিডিপি পার ক্যাপিটাই তুমি নাও, এই স্লাইডটাই প্রেজেন্ট করবে, নট দ্য আর্লিয়ার স্লাইড। এবং এখানে প্রেজেন্টেশনটাও হচ্ছে you will just see that it is increasing or decreasing. This is the first thing. And second is whether the trend is linear or non-linear. Okay? Just এই দুটো পয়েন্ট বলবো, don't spend too much time on it. তারপরে আরেকটা স্লাইডে তোমরা রিগ্রেশন রেজাল্টস গুলো একসাথে প্রেজেন্ট করে দাও। এখানে এত বেশি ইনফরমেশন না, ইটস ভেরি ডিফিকাল্ট টু অ্যাবজর্ভ ইট। তুমি এই যে লাস্ট দুটো স্লাইড নিয়েছো, সেখান থেকে ড্রপ দ্য আর্লিয়ার স্লাইড, কিপ অনলি দিস 2 স্লাইডস, মানে ওপরে প্যানেলে যেটা আছে, আর রিগ্রেশন রেজাল্টটা একটা টেবিলে তুমি প্রেজেন্ট করে দাও। দেখো ইউকের ক্ষেত্রে আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি ইটস আ লিনিয়ার, ইটস নট আ লিনিয়ার ট্রেন্ড। জার্মানির ক্ষেত্রে কিন্তু লিনিয়ার ট্রেন্ড। জার্মানির ক্ষেত্রে তুমি জিডিপির লগ জিডিপির উপর রান করো, ইউকের ক্ষেত্রে তুমি লগ জিডিপি অ্যান্ড জিডিপি স্কোয়ার ওর উপরে রান করো। ওকে, করে রেজাল্টটা একটা টেবিলে নেক্সট স্লাইডে প্রেজেন্ট করো।
Okay, sir, we will make the changes. Okay, so now we can conclude the lower labor force participation rate of women compared to that of men represents an underutilization of women's labor in the paid labor market, which arises from inferior employment and decent work opportunities, human capital differences, and unpaid domestic labor and care constraints. These are some of the main problems leading to a gender gap or a disparity in the labor force participation rate and require immediate attention in order to bridge the gap and bring about further developments in our countries of concern. Thank you.
Okay, just go back to the graphs, ওই বার ডায়াগ্রাম গুলো।
ও আচ্ছা, ওকে স্যার।
হ্যাঁ এইটাই।
এইটা স্যার।
হ্যাঁ এটা দেখো। First of all, bar diagrams are not very useful. Use, if you want to represent time trends, use a line graph. আচ্ছা,
ওকে স্যার।
সেকেন্ড হচ্ছে যে আমরা দেখছি মেল লেবার ফোর্স পার্টিসিপেশন ফল করছে, ফিমেলস আর রাইজিং। সো হাউ ক্যান ইউ সে দ্যাট ইজ জেন্ডার ডিসপ্যারিটি অ্যান্ড ইট ইজ ইনক্রিজিং? Gender
Sir,
disparity is coming down.
so there has been a gender disparity from earlier times which is decreasing as the country is developing.
হ্যাঁ, তো সেটা বলো। You have to say clearly. You can't just say that there is gender disparity.
Okay, sir.
এখন গ্যাপটা কত হচ্ছে? It is 66 and about 58, about 8%. জার্মানিতে যাও, জার্মানিতে তো আরো কম হচ্ছে। So be careful how you are concluding. তোমার ডেটার সঙ্গে রেজাল্টসের সঙ্গে যেন কনসিস্টেন্ট হয়। Don't try to get a very dramatic or stereotype result.
Okay, sir.
তোমার স্টাডিতে যেটা আসছে সেটাই প্রেজেন্ট করবে।
Okay, sir.
ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ।
So thank you, sir. We'll keep that in mind and do the change.
হ্যাঁ দেখো, এগুলো যেটা বলছি বাকিরাও আশা করি শুনবে, এক নম্বর। সেকেন্ড যেটা হচ্ছে যে when you are making the next presentation, try to keep these points in mind. Okay, next group please. Yeah, it's visible.
Sir, we will start presenting.
Yeah.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Today our group CATSPAW is going to present its analysis on the trends in labor force participation rates for the two countries, Australia and New Zealand. Aishwarya, next slide. Our main objectives are to analyze the trends in male labor force participation and female labor force participation rates for Australia and New Zealand, and running the regression of FLPR and MLPR on log of GDP per capita and log of GDP per capita square. The methods we have used in our analysis are graphical analysis and regression analysis. Our data source has been the World Bank data. The definition that for labor force participation rate that we have used is that labor force participation rate is the proportion of the population aged 15 and above that is economically active, that is all the people who supply labor for the production of goods and services during a specific period. So we begin with our comparison. In the first graph, we have a comparison between the MLPR and FLPR for Australia and between MLPR for both Australia and New Zealand. We see that the male labor force participation for both Australia and New Zealand follow more or less similar trends. And there are significant falls in the MLPR during the years 1992 to 1993, in the year 2003, and then again on the years 2013 and 2019. For Australia, in 1993, the participation rate fell as the economy had entered into recession. However, more recently, between the late 2016 and the middle of 2018, there was a period of very strong employment growth for Australia, during which the male labor force participation rate rose by 1 percentage point. The peaks in the graph for the MLPR for both the countries are also very similar. We have significant crests during the years 2006 to 7 and during the years 2017 to 18. Coming to the next graph, we are comparing the female labor force participation rate for the countries, and we see a strikingly similar trends for both the countries. There has been some rise in the female labor force participation for the years 1995 to 1996 and during the years 2005 to 2007, and then again during the years 2017 to 18 for both countries. There is a somewhat positive rise in the female labor force participation over the years for the countries. So we've come to our next slide, and comparing the MLPR and FLPR for Australia itself, we see that quite obviously the male labor force participation is overall much more than the female labor force participation. However, while the MLPR follows a somewhat falling trend over the years, the FLPR has risen over the years. Uh, in the years 1980 to
Acha, can you
2000,
just can you go back a little bit, please?
yes, sir.
Okay, see, this is a classic case of. Uh, okay, I'm asking the class. Look at this graph. Do you think that there has been a substantial fall in the labor force participation in Australia?
Sir, only in the case of Mlpr.
Yeah, I'm talking about MLPR. It has fallen sharply, hasn't it? But look at
Yes.
the axis. What is the axis? 69 to 77. So that means the huge fall is only from 75 to 70, only 5% over a period of 30 years. This is what we call lying using graphs. Instead, what she has done is to blow up the difference, make it large artificially. If the axis had been 0 to 100, we would have been able to see clearly that there has been a fall in male labor force participation, but it's only 5% over a 30-year period. So as I've told you repeatedly, look at the axis, use the axis carefully. Are you blowing it up? Are you understating the preference? The scale of the axis, the maximum and minimum range over here, that becomes very important. Continue. In the next slide, it becomes very clear. See, over here, you can see a sharp fall, and this is rising. So one would expect that the female labor force participation in Australia is greater than male in 2020. But go to the next slide. You can see there's a big gap. The reason is that this has almost remained same. The male labor force participation has almost remained same. Females has risen, not very much. Okay, please continue.
Okay, sir. So coming to the first graph in the slide, we are comparing MLPR and FLPR for Australia, and we see quite obviously that the male labor force participation is more than the female labor force participation. And while the MLPR follows a somewhat falling trend, the FLPR has risen over the years. The aggregate workforce participation for Australia had actually increased during the years 1980 to 2005, and this rise, however, masks the very divergent trends between participation rates for males and females. The participation rate of males had declined over the years, and while the female participation rate had actually increased. And this growth in the female participation since the 1980s has been largely driven by the growth in the participation of married women, as well as been influenced by a range of other factors like increased level of educational attainment, greater social among women, greater social acceptance of working mothers, declining fertility rates, and more flexible working arrangements. Coming to the last graph in this slide, uh, we are we are comparing the I'm sorry, we are comparing the MLPR and FLPR trends for New Zealand. And New Zealand shows a more or less steady trend with some minor ups and downs for MLPR during the years 1992 to 2020. And the FLPR trend of New Zealand is an increasing curve. The labor force participation rate for New Zealand had actually increased over the 20 years from 1989 to 2009, but this increase was driven entirely by the females, for whom participation rose from 53.2 to 62.2% over this period, while the male participation, in fact, fell slightly from 75.1 to 74.6%. Going over to the regression part, Shukarna will take over.
Okay, thank you, Diki. So now we have summarized the regression results, which we found by using a log linear model and regressing MLPR and FLPR on the log of GDP per capita. The the primary observations that we noted were pretty much the same for Australia and New Zealand both. The R square values for males is low, whereas for females it is high, meaning that the model fits the data well in case of females, whereas the fit is not so great in case of males. The p value for GDP per capita is less than 0.05, meaning that it is significant at 1% level of significance. This means that GDP per capita has a significant effect on the labor force participation rate for both males and females. The T stat of GDP per capita is of a magnitude which is large enough to reject the null hypothesis. Moving to the next slide, please. So here we did a scatter plot of MLPR and FLPR on the log of GDP per capita for both the countries. The primary observation here is that MLPR and log of GDP per capita is negatively related in case of Australia, whereas it is positively related in case of New Zealand. This means that this basically means that as the log of GDP per capita value increases, the MLPR falls in case of Australia, whereas it rises in case of New Zealand. For the scatter plot for the FLPR and log of GDP per capita for Australia and New Zealand both, we see that the curve is positively sloped. The slope is much higher in case of Australia, whereas the line is much flatter in case of New Zealand. Can we have the next slide, Ashwarya? Now, we also did a regression. We also regressed MLPR and FLPR on the log of GDP per capita, log of squared GDP per capita, and the results were exactly the same. R square values for males and females, males was low and for females it was high. The p value was significant at 1% level, and the t stat value was large enough so that we could reject the null hypothesis. Can we have the next slide? And likewise, the scatter plot for MLPR and FLPR on log of GDP per capita squared for both countries was also the same, as we can see here. So to conclude, or to sum up, we can say that while comparing the MLPR and FLPR for Australia and New Zealand, we get quite similar trends. The graphs are characterized with crests and troughs over the years. The Australian MLPR has fallen over the years while FLPR has risen, in spite of the overall MLPR being more than the overall FLPR values. In New Zealand, the FLPR increases over the years. For Australia, MLPR is negatively related to GDP per capita, whereas the FLPR is positively related to GDP per capita. The increase in the female labor force participation in Australia can be attributed to married women, where 90% of this increase was primarily due to women being employed part-time. On the other hand, MLPR in Australia decreases as GDP per capita increases due to slower employment growth in industries and a trend towards early retirement. For New Zealand, the slope is positive for both males and females, meaning that labor force participation rate is positively related to GDP per capita for both males and females. Policies like childcare facilities, parental leave might also focus on increasing hours of work, thereby impacting GDP per capita positively, simultaneously increasing both MLPR and FLPR. Thank you. This concludes our presentation.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't like this presentation at all. It's very messy. See, we use scatter plots to find out whether the relation is linear or non-linear. Then we run the regression. But you're drawing the regression first, and then you're coming to the scatter plot. It simply doesn't make sense. Second is, if you go back to the slides, the scatter plots, please go to slide 6. See, have you run it against? If you look at the top panel, you have written over here ML at the slide title is MLPR. No, look at the right hand side. FLPR log of GDP. So it means you are regressing it or plotting it against simply GDP, not GDP per capita. But if you look at the x-axis, is written log of GDP per capita. So your graph is simply inconsistent. You're giving one title, but you're getting something completely, you're plotting it on something which is completely different. In one case, you're writing FLPR. In the graph below that, you're writing labor participation rate, female. In the right-hand panel, you have written LPR. Whether it's male, female, it's not there. At the bottom, the y-axis is just given as a bracket. Okay, go to the regression, slide 7. You start, the first row is intercept. And then you give n. See, there are two ways of presenting the data, regression results. You can either give the model statistics. In that case, you start with n, then you give f, and you give r square. And then you give the report the coefficients. The other is you can report the coefficients first, and then you give the model statistics. You have just jumbled it up. Again, and this is something which I think all of you should be a bit careful about. You're just pasting the results. You're not even seeing whether it's rounded off or not. What is this? 90.64497? We don't, this is very sloppy work. You're putting a extra blank column over here. It doesn't make sense. It's a huge column. It's taking a lot of space. See, when you have to present everything, you have to just think about space. Instead, just put an extra column at the top. Merge the cells above MLPR and FLPR, write Australia. Above MLPR, just put New Zealand. There's no need for an extra column. Okay, so I'm very sorry, but I don't like this work. It's very sloppy. Okay, thank you. But I hope that you learn from it. I'm sure that you'll do better next time.
Yes, so definitely we'll improve all of these.
Yeah. So I think all of you have presented. So I'll quickly take the roll call. Ritam,
Present, sir.
Protyush,
Yes, sir.
Shoham, শ্রেয়া শ্রেয়া আছো তো তুমি?
Present, sir.
রাজদীপ,
Present, sir.
সুষমা,
Yes, sir.
শ্রেয়সী প্রেজেন্ট, শ্রেয়া মণ্ডল প্রেজেন্ট, অভিষেক,
Present, sir.
অন্বেষা, রিতনু, বর্ষা,
Present, sir.
মেহুলি, শিবানী,
Present, sir.
সুকন্যা প্রেজেন্ট, শ্রেয়সী দাস,
Present, sir.
আচ্ছা, সৃজিতা,
Present, sir.
সিঞ্জিনী, প্রিয়ঙ্কা,
Present, sir.
ঐশ্বরিয়া,
Present, sir.
সাগ্নিক, আরাত্রিক,
Yes, sir.
ধ্রুব, লক্ষদীপ,
Sir, Lokadip
Lokadip,
chat box.
সৃজনী,
Present, sir.
ঐশী প্রেজেন্ট, রাতুল প্রেজেন্ট, রূপশ্রী,
Present, sir.
সায়নী, আচ্ছা, দীপতনু,
Yes, sir.
অর্ক,
Yes, sir.
অলিপ্রিয়া, দিঘি প্রেজেন্ট,
Present.
তিয়াশা, শ্রেয়সী, এটা শ্রেয়সী সাহা, আচ্ছা, স্বপ্নীল,
Present, sir.
প্রতিভু,
Yes, sir.
আচ্ছা, অত্রি,
Yes, sir.
দর্পক, ইয়াশ বোধহয় অ্যাবসেন্ট আজকে, না? ইয়াশ, সোমদুতি অ্যাবসেন্ট, সম্ভব,
Present, sir.
Sir, Olipria present.
কে?
Sir, Olipria. My connection is very problematic today, so
হ্যাঁ, আরেকজন কে বলছো?
Sir, Olipria.
হ্যাঁ, অলিপ্রিয়া ঠিক আছে।
Amit, 42.
অমিত তোমাকে ডাকিনি, না?
হ্যাঁ, স্যার।
হ্যাঁ, ঠিক আছে। তোমার তো চারজন তো তাহলে আনসার করেন, ঠিক আছে, ওরা বোধহয় করেছে।
Sir, Mehuli present, roll 16.
আর কেউ প্রেজেন্ট করনি? ওকে, okay, so I'll start my screen sharing. হ্যাঁ, রিতনু তোমায় করেছি তো। So I have discussed poverty. Now I am coming to inequality. Okay, can you see this presentation?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, the first thing is, how do we measure inequality? The most common method of measuring inequality is the Gini coefficient. Now, have you discussed this Gini coefficient in any of your development or statistics
sir.
classes?
Yes, sir.
So you-
Development.
So you know what Gini is, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'll very briefly I'll go through it. In Gini, what we do is we create a quantile, or rather we create a percentile group. Let us suppose that we have a national income of 100 and a group of 10 people. Okay, if you have perfect equality, then everyone will get rupees 10. Okay, so if we take the first 10 people, so over here we have plotted proportion of population and proportion of income. So if we take the first 10 people, then they are going to get 10% of the income. See, the first person represents 10% of the population. How much of the income will he get? Everyone gets 10 rupees. So that means the percentage of national income that he gets is 10%. If you add the second person, this is 20% of the population. What is the income? 10 plus 10, 20, which is 20% of the population. So in this way, we will get a 45-degree line. The percentage of the proportion of population measured on the x-axis is equal to proportion of national income enjoyed by these groups. Okay, so both the percentages or proportions are equal. Now suppose we have inequality. We take 10% of the people. So this is 10% of the people, but they enjoy less than 10% of the national income. We take 20% of the population, but they have less than 20% of the income. Okay. So in an unequal state, we are going to end up not on the 45-degree line, but on points below the 45-degree line. And if we connect it, we get what is known as the Lorentz curve. We will get a curve below the 45-degree line. And the further away the line from the 45-degree the line is, the more inequality exists in the society. So the Gini coefficient is defined as A divided by A plus B. That is the most common definition, but we can also redefine this in this way. Okay, because remember A plus B is equal to half of 1. This is 1, this is 1. So the triangle, the area of the triangle is 0.5. So A plus B is equal to 0.5. Using this, we can redefine Gini as 0.5A or 1.1 minus 0.5B. Okay. Now, if we have perfect equality, এটা তোমরা নিজেরা একটু ওয়ার্কআউট করে নিও, because A plus B is equal to 0.5. We can redefine the Gini using in this ways. So we have, if we have perfect equality, the Lorentz ratio will be the 45-degree line. If we have imperfect equality, then we are going to have something like this. Okay, sorry, ekhane amar line ta draw korai ni, I forgot to draw it. There should be, the Lorentz will be this will be the Lorentz curve. Generally, the Gini coefficient lies between 0.20 and 0.50. Okay, so we should be a bit careful about this. Although Gini can be very much larger, but in normal circumstances, Gini will be between 0.20, 0.5. In India, it typically lies in the 0.30 range. Now, one problem with Gini is that we can have different distributions generating the same G. Like over here, G2 clearly dominates G1. The inequality in a society with a Gini coefficient of G2 is clearly more than in another society where the Lorentz ratio is given by G1. Okay, so as we move away from the 45-degree line, the society becomes more equal. But in this case, we have two completely different distributions. But if you look at this part, G2 is fairly equal, is relatively equal. But if you consider the upper section, it is G1 which is more equal. So if you look at the ratio A plus B, A plus A divided by A plus B, it's quite possible that G1 will equal to G2, even though the two distributions are different. So if we have dominance, it's very easy to compare between the Gini coefficients. The comparisons are valid. But if we have a case like in this diagram, where the Gini coefficient, Lorentz curves are intersecting, then comparison is not that easy. Okay, now if you look at the trends in inequality in India, in the first, just after planning, in the initial about 15 years after planning, India was a very static, centrally directed and regulated economy. Transport, agriculture, construction, it was mainly in the public sector. Commodity prices, you may ask that how is agriculture in the public sector? Well, no, agriculture is not in the public sector. But what happened was the central government provided a lot of protection to the farmers in terms of minimum support prices, purchasing of buffer stocks, and so on. So the role of the central government was very, it was the central government played a very strong role in agriculture. The transport and construction sectors were by and large under state control. Commodity prices were regulated. The economy was protected by trade barriers. You had import quotas, you had import duties, and the tax system was highly progressive. From the mid 80s onwards, the process of liberalization and trade openness started. We talk about liberalization from the 70s, but in reality, it was introduced in India by Rajiv Gandhi in the seventh five-year plan. Market regulations were gradually relaxed, foreign investment was encouraged, external borrowing started, and import duties were removed. Simultaneously, in the industrial sector, monopoly regulation, then privatization, these were the policy changes that were started. In the 90s, it really took off. In the 90s, the government of India faced a lot of financial crisis, and as a result of this, they had to borrow from the IMF and World Bank. Now, one of the conditions for borrowing from IMF and World Bank is that they had to undertake a set of reforms, what is called structural adjustment program. So they had to deregulate prices. That means prices were determined not by the government. The government did not set price ceilings or price floors, but the market demand and supply set the prices. Privatization was started. The foreign sector was liberalized so that you had a freer inflow and outflow of commodities. Foreign investment could come in. And this trend continued in the current millennium. Now, Chancellor and Piketty, in a paper published in a working paper in 2017, looked at the Indian income inequality between over a very long period, 1922 to 2015. They combined data from three sources: survey data, national income data, and data from the income tax. And they studied the long-run trends in income inequality in India. Now, before 1980, they had access to mainly tax data. Now, how many people paid taxes? In India, very little. Only the top 10% paid taxes. So therefore, the analysis pre-1980 was mainly, not mainly, it focused on the comparatively rich people, the top 10% which pays taxes. After 1980, when Chancellor and Piketty had more exhaustive data, they focused on the entire gamut, the entire Indian population. Okay. So this is the broad trend starting from 1920. What has happened to the top 1% national income share? You can see that it's not a very clear trend. It went up during the 30s, 1930s. After independence, there was a decline, particularly from the late 60s. There was a decline from the 70s also. Why 70s? Because Indira Gandhi came to power and her focus was on social justice, Garibi Hatao. So that is why we can see a sharp decline in income in the top income share from the 1970s. And this continued till 1985, when Rajiv Gandhi came to power. After liberalization started, the top income share started to increase. And you can see it has risen very sharply, and it has become more than about 22-23%. Okay. So you can see that the peak was in the just immediate pre-war period, sharp decline in the late 60s, and then a V-shaped relation. It rises with liberalization. Now the top 0.1%, so we are looking at an even smaller proportion. It represents an almost similar portion. From the 1930s and 40s, in fact, it has declined. After liberalization, it has increased sharply. This is 0.01%. So this is an even smaller. We are going to smaller and smaller proportions. Again, we have a similar picture. Decline with liberalization, their share increases. So you can see that a top portion. See over here, this is 1%. Sorry. This is 1%. This is 0.1%. And this is 0.01%. Okay. Now this is after the 50s. The top 10% versus middle 40%. We can see that the top 40%, top 10%, their share declined till the 1980s. On the other hand, if you look at the middle 40%, the middle class, their share increased after independence till the 80s. Once liberalization started, the trends got reversed. So we see that there's a scissors pattern. Okay. Now let us look at the poorest half, the bottom 50%. So we have looked at the top 10%, 40%. Now we look at the bottom 50%. And we can see that after independence, there was a marginal increase from about 22 to 24% over here. But after that, 1980s onwards, liberalization, a very sharp decrease. And this has been persistent. So if you look at the cumulative growth, compare between countries, then we can see that in case of the full population, the population growth, what has been the growth in the income? In India, between 1980 and 2015, per capita income has gone up by 201%. In China, it is huge, 776%. But both of this is much higher than what has happened in US and Western Europe. Per capita income has gone up in US and Western Europe, but by a much smaller proportion. So this part is very nice. If you look at the bottom 50%, compare between India and China. The growth is 90% for India, only 386% for China. Middle 40%, 94%, 733. So middle classes have been the beneficiaries. Top 10%, yeah, there's been growth over here. But this growth is even more. I mean, almost 5 times that the bottom 50 and middle 40. So it's not surprising. What we can say is that we find a cobra pattern. If you look at the growth in per capita income, it is almost the same till 90%, then it rises sharply. And you can see that 90, 99, 99.9 is increasing. It is almost becoming vertical. That is why they call it a cobra pattern, the cobra curve. Okay, so I'll post the Chancelli-Piketty paper to you. Is there any questions about per capita income? Sorry, inequality.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, could you explain what the Lorenz curve for perfect inequality is? Is it both the axes, like the bottom axis and the right-hand side axis?
Yes, because this is 0, and then you move over here. So if you draw the curve, it is like this. But actually from here, it's a point. It's a point over there. It doesn't really touch this point. It just stops before it. And then there's a point over here. So basically it becomes L-shaped. Or rather inverse L-shaped.
Okay, sir. So it's an extreme case where one person has all the income.
Not even one person. One person. Only one people.
Yeah, one individual.
One individual, yes. So you won't be able to draw it. That's why you have to make it an inverse L-shaped.
Sir, in this case, will the value of Gini be 1?
0. Sorry, Gini will be very high. Gini will be, I think,
one. Or for perfect equality, how is 0, I think? Or is it half? Sorry, it would be half.
No, for perfect equality, what happens? A becomes 0. Okay.
So perfect equality মানে তো 45 degree line টাই
45 degree line. So it becomes 0 by B becomes half.
Right.
So it becomes 0 by half, which is 0. আর এইটা যদি হয় এইখানে যেটা হবে A will become half, B will become 0. So it is basically half by half, which is 1.
1, right.
So G ranges between B is 0.5 A is 0.5, B is 0. Okay, but generally G will lie between 0.20 and 0.50. Okay, now I wanted to discuss about the human development assignment. আমি তোমাদের এইটা যেটা করেছো, you're asking, you're requesting access. I've shared it with the CRs. Sorry, not the CRs, with the group coordinators. So if the group coordinators can email your name, I'll share it with you also. So group coordinators, you can just nominate someone if you want. I'll share it with him or her also, so that you can fill in the Excel sheet.
Sir.
Huh.
So would it be possible for one of the group coordinators to share it? And in that case, would anybody else be able to edit the form? Or do you have to sort of provide permission?
No, I have to provide permission.
Right, sir. Okay, sir.
তো সেই কারণে মানে পুরো ক্লাসের সঙ্গে আমি শেয়ার করতে চাই না। So all of the group coordinators, all 7 of you, please, যদি তোমরাই fill up করো, it's fine. আর যদি তোমরা চাও যে অন্য কেউ fill up করুক, যেমন O3, দর্পক আর প্রতিভু, তোমরা প্লিজ নামটা পাঠিয়ে দাও, আমি শেয়ার করে নিচ্ছি, কিংবা আমি এখন জিজ্ঞেস করে নিচ্ছি। শ্রেয়া, তুমি নিজে ফিল আপ করবে না কাউকে দিয়ে ফিল আপ করাবে?
স্যার আমাকে বলছেন?
হ্যাঁ, শ্রেয়া
ও
মণ্ডল, হ্যাঁ।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, আমি করে দেবো।
আচ্ছা, তাহলে আমি তোমার গ্রুপে তোমার সাথে শেয়ার করা আছে। অর্ক, গ্রুপ
হ্যাঁ
2?
স্যার আমি হ্যাঁ স্যার আমি করব।
আচ্ছা, টারান্টুলাস, গ্রুপ 3? ইয়াশ তো নেই বোধহয় আজকে।
হ্যাঁ স্যার, ইয়াশ নেই। ঐশী, ক্যান ইউ ডু ইট? নালে
Yes, sir.
ওকে ওকে।
আচ্ছা, তাহলে ঐশীর সঙ্গে শেয়ার করে দিচ্ছি। আচ্ছা, অলিপ্রিয়া, তুমি নিজে করবে না কাউকে রেসপন্সিবিলিটিটা দেবে? Can you type it out or can your group decide and let me know? আচ্ছা, গ্রুপ 5, ঐশ্বর্য, তুমি বলো তো, who will share? অলিপ্রিয়া, তুমি আছো না বেরিয়ে গেছো?
না স্যার, আছি।
হ্যাঁ, তোমার গ্রুপে কে করবে?
স্যার
এক্সেল
আমার
শিট।
না নেটটা খুব প্রবলেম হচ্ছে, একটু রিপিট করলে ভালো হয়, অ্যাকচুয়ালি ভয়েসটা কেটে যাচ্ছে আপনার।
আমি যে এক্সেল শিটটা দিয়েছি, শেয়ার করেছি,
হুম।
সেটা তুমি ফিল আপ করবে না অন্য কেউ ফিল আপ করবে?
তা আমি ফিল আপ করে দেবো।
আচ্ছা, আরাত্রিক, তোমার গ্রুপ থেকে O3 করবে, তাই তো? O3 করবে না O3 and দর্পক, কে করবে?
স্যার O3 করতে পারে, শুধু O3 করলেই আমার মনে হয় ঠিক হবে, মানে বিকজ রেজাল্টস গুলো তো আমরা জানি, সো একজন ফিল আপ করে
একজন
O3
করলেই
চাইছে,
হবে,
সো
ঠিক আছে।
হ্যাঁ।
আচ্ছা, রাজদীপ, তোমার গ্রুপে?
স্যার আমি অলরেডি ফিল আপ করে দিয়েছি।
আচ্ছা, তুমি করে দিয়েছো।
আচ্ছা।
আচ্ছা, তোমার গ্রুপ 5?
স্যার আমরা করে দেব, আমি এখনো করিনি।
আচ্ছা, তুমি করে দেবে তো, কারোর সঙ্গে শেয়ার করতে হবে না, ঠিক আছে।
ওকে স্যার।
আচ্ছা, regarding the next assignment, so I'll give you 2 assignments, after which both the course and assignments will be finished. তোমরা ক্লাসরুমটা দেখতে পাচ্ছ তো?
ইয়েস স্যার।
হ্যাঁ, ওকে। তোমাদের গ্লোবাল ইনইকুয়ালিটি, দিস ওয়াজ দ্য ফার্স্ট অ্যাসাইনমেন্ট। So I have asked, I've given you a link. তোমরা এই লিঙ্কটা থেকে অ্যাসাইনমেন্টটা করবে। There is no need to do any other, look at any other source. This is one. Second is that you have to prepare only 1 or 2 slides. So don't present 10 of 6-7টা স্লাইড প্রেজেন্ট করবে না, ঠিক আছে? আচ্ছা, I have given you 7 questions over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So group 1 will answer, how do we measure poverty? Discuss the Penn's parade method only. Group 2 will answer, how equal were pre-industrial societies? Group 3 will answer, how has global income inequality been changing over time? ঠিক আছে, and so on, like this. Have you understood what is your group's assignment?
Yes sir, one of the 7 assignments in order.
Yes.
7 questions rather, sorry.
Yeah. So after you have done it, just paste it in that order together. Okay? তোমাদের মধ্যে নিজেদের কাউকে একটা অ্যাপয়েন্ট করে দাও, করে একটা কম্পোজিট স্লাইড হবে entitled Global Inequality. Okay? This will have the cover page, which is Global Inequality, and about 14 slides. 2 slides for each questions. কাউকে প্রেজেন্ট করতে হবে না, but this will be form a part of your study material. I can ask questions on it for your viva. I'll have a look at it. I'll mark every one of you, and I'm going to ask questions on the viva on these slides. Okay? এই স্লাইড, হ্যাঁ, এইতে তোমরা দেখো এখানেই সবকিছু পেয়ে যাবে। You just have to move up and down. You can download the chart, etc. যেমন পেন স্প্যারেটটা দেখো, ঠিক আছে, এটা যখন এসে গেছে এটাই দেখাচ্ছি। How unequal were pre-industrial societies. I think this is group 2. Okay. So you can এখানে বোধহয় এইটা ডাউনলোড করা যাবে না, দাঁড়ান। You can download this, you can copy this graph, আর এইখানে যে লেখাটা আছে সেটাকে ছোট করে এখানটা দিয়ে দেবে, ডিসকাস ইট। সো দিস শুড বি ওয়ান স্লাইড, দিস শুড বি আনাদার স্লাইড। আচ্ছা, এবার ফার্স্ট কোয়েশ্চেনটা যেমন ছিল, হাউ ডু উই মেজার ইনইকুয়ালিটি। পেন্স, সেখানে ইনইকুয়ালিটি তোমাদের গিনি কোএফিসিয়েন্ট পড়িয়েছি, বাট ইউ ডোন্ট হ্যাভ টু ডিসকাস ইট। এখানে ওই পেন্স প্যারেটটা আমি দিয়েছি, বলেছি ডিসকাস করতে। See, Guinea has been given over here. This is Penn's parrot. So just 2 slides on this. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Group 1, Group 2, বুঝতে পারছো? হ্যাঁ, জাস্ট 2টো স্লাইড দেবে, বেশি নয়। এগুলো বোধহয় গ্রুপ 5, গ্রুপ 6 এর জন্য এগুলো রয়েছে। প্রত্যেকে এইভাবে গ্রুপ দেবে। দেখো এগুলোকে সব ডাউনলোড করা যায়। ইউ ক্যান ডাউনলোড দিস কোয়েশ্চেন, দিস থিংস। একটু টাইম নেবে, আমার তো মিট করা আছে সেই কারণে ডিফিকাল্ট হবে। ইউ ক্যান ডাউনলোড দ্য ইমেজ, আর যেগুলো হবে না, যেমন এইটা প্রি ইন্ডাস্ট্রিয়াল সোসাইটিটা বোধহয় হবে না, ইউ ক্যান সেভ ইমেজ অ্যাজ আ জেপিজি ফাইল। সেভ ইমেজ করো, জেপিজি ফাইলে সেভ করে দিও। জেপিজি, নট জেপিজি, অ্যাজ আ পিএনজি ফাইল। ঠিক আছে? ইফ ইউ হ্যাভ এনি কোয়েরি, অফকোর্স ইউ ক্যান আস্ক মি। এর লাস্ট ডেটটা আমি I don't know how to change it, but let me see. লাস্ট ডেটটা বোধহয় পেরিয়ে গেছে, বাট আই উইল চেঞ্জ ইট। হ্যাঁ, এই তো এডিট। এটা তোমরা কবের মধ্যে করতে পারবে? টুডে ইজ 10th। ক্যান ইউ ডু ইট বাই December 17th? নেক্সট ওয়ান, জাস্ট 2 slides.
স্যার আসলে ডিসেম্বর 15 আমাদের একটা ভাইভা আছে ইকোনোমেট্রিক স্টুডেন্টসদের।
2টো স্লাইড তো, আর 1 উইক আছে, এই উইকেন্ডে করে নাও।
ঠিক আছে স্যার।
ইউ জাস্ট হ্যাভ টু ফোকাস। লিঙ্কটা তো পেয়ে গেছো, 2টো স্লাইড করতে কতক্ষণ লাগবে? গ্রাফটা কপি করতে হবে, লেখাটা কপি করে একটুখানি ওটাকে এডিট করে নিতে হবে। ঠিক আছে? আর কোনো স্লাইডে কোনো ফরম্যাটিং এগুলো করতে যেও না, একদম ব্ল্যাঙ্ক ওই যে হোয়াইট ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ড সেই ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডে করবে, তাহলে সবার সাথে ম্যাচিং হয়ে যাবে।
ওকে
Sir,
হ্যাঁ বলো।
sir, after we are done, we submit it on this link within the classroom.
না, তুমি যেটা করো আমাকে মেল করে পাঠিয়ে দাও।
Okay, sir.
হ্যাঁ
Okay,
ঠিক
sir.
আছে, তুমি ক্লাসরুমে সাবমিট করে দাও, তাতেও হবে। ইউ ক্যান সাবমিট ইট ইন দ্য ক্লাসরুম। আমি ওটাকে কম্বাইন করে নেব, কম্বাইন করে আল ডিস্ট্রিবিউট ইট।
স্যার আমার একটা
তোমাদের
কথা,
প্রেজেন্ট করতে হবে। হ্যাঁ, ইউ ডোন্ট হ্যাভ টু প্রেজেন্ট ইট, ইউ জাস্ট হ্যাভ টু প্রিপেয়ার দ্য স্লাইড। আর পরে তোমাদের এটা যখন পরীক্ষা হবে ওই সময় পড়ে নিতে হবে। হ্যাঁ বলো।
স্যার বলছি কি যে আমি না অ্যাক্সেস পাইনি ওই ফর্মটার, মানে লাস্ট একটা মেলও আপনি কোঅর্ডিনেটরদের পাঠিয়েছিলেন, ওটাও আমি পাইনি। আই হ্যাড টু আস্ক রাজদীপ টু ফরওয়ার্ড মি, তো আমি এবারেরটাও মনে হয় পাইনি, বিকজ আই হ্যাভ চেকড লাইক রিপিটেড টাইমস। মানে আমি ক্লাসরুমে যে মেলগুলো হয় সেগুলো পাই, বাট আদার্স আই ডোন্ট গেট দেম।
তোমার মেল আইডিটা কত কি বলো তো?
ওই
ওই
ঐশ্বরিয়া, স্যার আই থিঙ্ক ইউ হ্যাভ মিসড আর আই হবে ওখানে, ঐশ্বরিয়া মজুমদারের RIYA।
IYA, তাই তো?
ইয়েস স্যার।
ঠিক আছে,
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
ঠিক আছে, আমি শেয়ার করে দেবো।
ওকে স্যার।
ওকে, সো ইটস জাস্ট 2 slides, ইটস নাথিং মাচ অ্যান্ড ইউ ডোন্ট হ্যাভ টু রিড ইট। এটা ছোট করে একটু জাস্ট, বাট মেক ইট নিট, এটাই আর কি। জাস্ট কপি পেস্ট করে পুরো মেটেরিয়ালটা দিয়ে দিও না, ওটাকে বুলেট ফর্মে জাস্ট করে দাও।
তা আপনি ফর্মটা পাঠাবেন তো?
কোন
Because আমি
ফর্মটা?
কিন্তু কোনো ফর্মটা রিসিভ করিনি, ওই গুগল শিট যেটাকে ফিল করতে হবে, মানে FLPR এর ওটা দিয়ে আর কি।
তোমার সেনগুপ্ত অলিপ্রিয়া তো?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, আমি তো রিসিভ করিনি, তাই জিজ্ঞেস করছি একবার।
বানানটা ঠিক আছে? দেখে নাও তো।
হ্যাঁ স্যার, এটাই তো মেল অ্যাড্রেস আমার।
ঠিক আছে, আমি আরেকবার শেয়ার করে দিচ্ছি।
ওকে স্যার।
ঐশী আর O3, তাই তো? Okay, so this is the good part.